Dark Sun. It's well known to most D&D players as one of, if not the most brutal, unforgiving, and controversial worlds to ever see print in all of D&D's history. The place is literally a godless wasteland ruled by unilaterally evil sorcerers who use their powers to subjugate and destroy anything they see as either useful or a threat. While it might be a bit of an oversimplification, it's not wrong to say Dark Sun is sort of like Mad Max, but if the main bad guys could all cast 9th level spells. It is an incredibly brutal world, and as a result, happens to be home to some of the most brutal creatures. So today, we're gonna take a voyage out onto the Sea of Silt and take a look at one of Dark Sun's most dangerous creatures, the Silt Horror. Silt Horrors, as their name would suggest, are horrible. They come in several different varieties, the most common of which is a gargantuan kraken-like beast that lurks beneath the sand and erupts to devour everything and anything that it can. There were originally 4 different types of Silt Horror, white, black, gray, and brown, but later the red and magma variants would be added, all of which were introduced in 2nd edition. And since Dark Sun was never technically released for 3rd edition, aside from a couple nods here and there, as well as a Dragon magazine article here and there for 3.5, the monsters beneath the surface just kinda stayed there. That is until 4th edition came along and heroically put out an update to the setting, and for once, I actually think I prefer the 4E stat block to the 2nd edition one. I know, crazy, but hear me out. The biggest difference between all these different shades of Silt Horror was more or less their size and tactics, which, like, I understand they're not all identical, but 4E just rolled them all into one stat block, which in my opinion was the correct thing to do. Given 4E's penchant for dumping like 5 variant stat blocks for every random creature you come across into the DM's lap, I was really surprised to see this, but at the end of the day, if you want a Silt Horror that's smaller or lives in magma or has a higher intelligence, you don't need an entirely new stat block to do that. But I digress. What even is a Silt Horror? Well, they stem from ancient sea monsters who once lurked in the deepest parts of the ocean, but when Athos got all post-apocalyptic about it, they were forced to adapt or die, and well, most of them died, but the few who managed to survive were twisted by magic and the changing of their environment into Silt Horrors, which we now know and love. These creatures are truly gargantuan, and their entire form is very rarely seen. Most people only live long enough to see a massive tentacle sprouting from the sand before getting crushed and pulled beneath the desert to where the monster's tremendous maw is waiting to devour everything and anything it manages to grab a hold of. The Silt Horror itself doesn't actually need to breach the surface of the sand because it has tremor sense in a radius that expands for 3 miles, meaning it can detect even the slightest movement on the surface within 3 miles of its current location. And once it detects something that feels like food, it will immediately head in that direction to ambush its prey. Aside from this incredibly high-tuned tremor sense though, Silt Horrors are entirely blind, meaning that if you manage to take flight or otherwise get onto the surface of something that it is not touching the ground the Silt Horror is in, it can't see you, and while it can still attack, any attacks it makes against you will be at disadvantage. Silt Horrors dislike the harsh sunlight anyways, and much prefer to be deep down in the cool sand below. In fact, one of the few times you might actually see a Silt Horror's entire body breach onto the surface is at night, when the sun is down and not threatening to scorch their skin. I have to imagine this aversion to the sun is also part of the reason why their skin is this pallid white color. I mean, theoretically they do come in a bunch of different colors, but the OG Silt Horror is the white horror, and that's why. Now you'd think this would make them a monstrosity or a beast maybe, but creature types weren't exactly explicit in the older rules, and in 4E they are typed as aberrant beasts, which is not really a thing anymore. In my opinion, they can kind of fall on either side of the monstrosity aberration fence, but personally I prefer them as aberrations just because we don't have a ton of those that aren't mind flayers or weird far realm guys. Honestly, I think this does depend a lot on the setting, because if they're just naturally occurring creatures in the desert, then monstrosity does make total sense. But if they have somehow been created as a result of twisted magic and corruption, like they have in Dark Sun, aberration is definitely the way to go. But whether you're throwing aberrant creatures at your party or merely gargantuan monstrosities, first, you need a group to actually play with, and our sponsor this week is a great way to do that. StartPlaying.com is a website that does exactly what it says on the box. It lets you start playing. Whether you're completely new to D&D and don't know where to start, or you're familiar with the game but you just can't seem to find a group that works with your schedule, Start Playing is a super easy way to find a group playing the TTRPG of your choice right now. Maybe you've even got a group ready to go, but nobody wants to be the DM. Tale as old as time, and a problem you can solve in literally 5 minutes on Start Playing. Every game master's got their own page, so you can check out verified user reviews before you sign up for a game with them, and with Start Playing handling any potential payments involved, there's no risk of getting scammed by someone in a sketchy Discord server. So you can forget about trawling through forums to try and find the perfect group to match your vibe, playstyle, and schedule. Just jump over to Start Playing using the link below and see for yourself how easy it is to play D&D online, even if it's your first time. Thank you so much to Start Playing for bringing us here this week to talk about the most horrible thing you could possibly encounter in the desert. Speaking of which, surprising no one, the Silt Horror clocks in with a chunky CR of 14. They have up to 6 tentacles growing out of their main body at any given time, and they're all gonna hit like a truck, dealing a ton of damage and grappling the target. And since their goal is to chow down like a hungry hippo most of the time, they of course have a swallow attack that allows them to eat something grappled by one of their tendrils. Once swallowed by this thing, you're probably Dunyan rings, because not only are you restrained, but you also just start taking a bunch of acid damage every round as the horror digests you, which is a bad time. However, if you manage to deal enough damage to the thing from inside its belly, it might just barf you up, so all you can really do is stab away and hope for the best. Its tentacles are, of course, its main means of dealing damage though, and if it manages to grab someone, it can then use its fling attack to throw that person at another person, damaging both of them. I did also give this creature rules similar to the Hydra's heads, minus the regeneration bit, so if the party wants to hack its tentacles off to make the creature less dangerous and possibly liberate a captured ally, they can do so. But you gotta be careful dealing damage to this thing, because I also gave it a reaction where if it takes 15 damage from something it has grappled, it can fling that something away. Which, hey, you're not grappled anymore, but you also might have a few broken bones, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But as with all Dark Sun monsters, the best part is always how you can deploy them at the game table. Because of course the Silt Horror can be an effective random encounter for a crew of adventurers traveling through the desert, but their mere existence should be something that adds to the local myth of your game world. Whether you're playing in a Dark Sun game or not, the places that a Silt Horror is known to lurk should be considered off limits to any villages or other communities that might be nearby. In fact, the people who are most wary of Silt Horrors in their original setting are giants. And I mean, when you think about it, if this thing is deciding where to go based on the vibrations created by potential prey walking on the surface, nobody's gonna be sending stronger signals than a couple giants traveling through the radius of its detection. So maybe the party stumbles across some giants, and that turns into a bit of a spicy interaction, only for the situation to be interrupted by a Silt Horror that was hunting the giants before the party even arrived. Or maybe the giants are the ones who put the party in the horror's path. Perhaps the horror has moved into some passage that is important to the giants for one reason or another, and they can't effectively hunt the Silt Horror because they're so big, so it's just obvious anytime they approach, and they ask the party to aid them in ridding the desert of this thing once and for all. Or maybe they've been sent after it by a collector of sorts. Silt Horror specimens are incredibly rare, so maybe someone is willing to pay a lot of money to see the thing taxidermied. It's also possible that they are meant to capture one alive, which is a nearly impossible thing to do unless you can get a hatchling. See, a Silt Horror only reproduces once or twice during its entire life, which is only about 40 years long. But when it does, it kills a suitable bit of prey and then lays its eggs in the carcass, which quickly hatch on their own by the hundreds and spread out across the desert. Most of them won't make it into adulthood, but the few that do will of course become fully grown Silt Horrors. So maybe the party has to try and jump in at the perfect moment to capture a living specimen from a new brood and bring it back to someone willing to pay top dollar. It's also possible that they're going after the horror because it ate everyone who was part of a caravan crossing the desert, which wouldn't be unusual, but it turns out that this caravan was carrying something very important, and the party needs to go fish it out of the Silt Horrors' guts, either by getting themselves swallowed or by killing it and then searching through the remains. It's even possible that this thing they're looking for is the body of someone who was consumed. Maybe they've been tasked with returning the skeleton of some noble's son who got themselves eaten, and they need his body to cast resurrection. I also really like the idea of using this thing as an obstacle. I mean, all monsters are obstacles in one way or another, but having the hunting grounds of a Silt Horror just be this 3-mile area in a desert that everyone knows to avoid, but of course, on the other side of it, there is something of tremendous importance. Maybe an ancient dungeon with untold treasures, or an oasis tended by several Ashura that can grant eternal youth. Or maybe the creature itself is being dominated by someone who's using it to control the desert to enrich themselves by holding dominion over all the best trade routes. There could be some kind of magical artifact being wielded by an evil sorcerer that allows them to use the creature as a weapon, which is just asking to conclude with some dramatic irony. But ultimately, however you choose to use this creature, as always, link in the description down below is my version of its 5th edition stats, converted from the 2nd and 4th edition version so that you can use it at your game table for free as always. And over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon, you can find the Dungeon Dad high-res PDF version of the stats, which is all the same game information, but contains a little more flair as my way of saying thank you to all the folks who support me over there and help me keep on doing what I do. Speaking of which, it's time for Patron of the Week. And this week, I gotta give a shout out to Herald of the Vile. Thank you so much for your support. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have heralding me into whatever it is I'm being heralded into. I appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D or some other tabletop game you would like to see show up on Monster of the Week, let me know in the comments down below or in the Dungeon Dad Discord, and it will get added to the creature suggestions list. And who knows, you might just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week. I know that legally Spooky Month is over now. I think it's hilarious that the first creature we're covering outside of October has horror literally in the name. I didn't really think about that when I was planning this all out, but hey, here we go. This isn't really a Spooky Month video, but it is horrific, so do with that what you will. Personally, I love this creature, and mostly I decided to make it because I am currently running a D&D game that is taking place in a desert, and I can always use more desert encounters, but I do feel like this is a creature that could be used not just in the desert, but pretty much anywhere. I mean, that's always the thing with creatures like this, is you could very easily adapt it to be a snow guy who lives under the snow in the mountains. Or hey, make it a magma horror and it lives in the magma. You get the idea. Honestly, one of these things living beneath the snow is terrifying just because their skin is white, so they're gonna be even harder to see. That sucks. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then.